Kevin looked sternly at his son and was silent. He waited for an answer, but the boy was in no hurry to explain, and there was silence in the room. "What's going on here?" Hillary, Kevin's wife, and Leo's mother appeared in the doorway of the office. "Can either of you explain to me?" "Sure," the husband replied. "I can. Look at our heir, darling. First things started going missing from him. Clothes, 2 phones, then the tablet I gave him. That's only what I can remember. And then today his teacher called me and told me that Leo never has any money for school lunches, and he's hungry all day. Now, explain to me, Hillary, how is that possible? I am the owner of a big company. You have a cosmetics business, but our son is always hungry because he doesn't have money for food." "I'm not hungry," 8-year-old Leo frowned. "Then explain what you do with all the pocket money I give you. Why does your teacher call me and tell me you don't eat lunch at school and you are hungry every day? Why don't you buy yourself a proper lunch like all the other kids in your class?" "You're embarrassing me," the father said sternly to his son. Hillary had never seen her husband in such a condition and rushed to calm him down. "Hold on, Kevin. Let's get this sorted out. Leo, are you saving money for something?" his mother asked. "No." "Maybe someone is bullying you and taking your money away?" "No, no one is taking it away." Hillary fluttered her hands. "Then maybe you can explain to us what's going on." "No, nothing is going on." "Well, I don't know," Kevin burst out. "What should I do about this situation?" "Here's the deal. You're not getting any more pocket money. Got it? Until you tell us where you're spending it." "Understood," the boy nodded. "Can I go now?" "Get out of my sight," Kevin shouted. And when he walked out, Kevin turned to his wife. "Hillary, I don't understand what's going on with him." "Don't get upset, honey." Hillary walked over to her husband and began massaging his shoulders. "Maybe our little boy fell in love with some girl and buys her some gifts. He's growing up, Kevin. He's no longer the little boy who always obeyed us. By the way, Leo has completely copied your personality. He's going to be as tough as you are. But I love my family very much, and I won't let anyone hurt them," Kevin said. "I know that, my love. I know that, and I appreciate it very much. Trust me. My God, how lucky I am to have met you." In a burst of tenderness, Hillary leaned over and kissed her husband. With a deft movement, he immediately put her on his lap and kissed her back. They had been married for 10 years, but love, passion, and tenderness had not gone out of their relationship. Kevin and Hillary truly loved each other and couldn't even imagine cheating. They trusted each other in everything. But 8 years is a long time, and Hillary was sometimes sad and even cried quietly when her husband did not see her, regretting that she could not give him a daughter. They both loved Leo very much, and though they often spoiled him, they tried to educate him strictly so that he would not grow up to be a slacker. But they had such a huge house, and children's voices just had to be heard there. Hillary kissed her husband once again and left the office, letting herself sigh only in the corridor. "Lord, help me make my husband happier than he is now," the woman muttered to herself. Several days went by. One day, Hillary got a call from an unknown number. She answered, and her face immediately changed, and tears appeared in the woman's eyes. "Kevin," she turned to her husband, "Mom's been taken to the hospital with a heart attack." He immediately got up. "Come on, let's go. We'll sort everything out on the spot." The doctor said that the attack had passed and everything would be fine now, but constant nursing care and monitoring are necessary. "Mom, do you realize now that you're better off living with us?" Hillary asked. Ms. Lewis nodded and tears appeared in her eyes. "Mammy, come on, please don't worry." Hillary rushed to comfort her mother. "Ms. Lewis," Kevin added, "you will have your own room and a personal nurse." Thank you, children," the woman whispered, and weary of the conversation, closed her eyes. Kevin said goodbye and left, and Hillary stayed by her mother's side, unwilling to leave her alone with her misfortune. The relationship between them had always been very warm. Hillary was Ms. Lewis's only daughter, and for many years they lived together without letting strangers into their lives. Hillary never knew her father, and Ms. Lewis was unwilling to reveal that she had become pregnant by the married man she loved more than life. To be fair, initially, Ms. Lewis did not know he was married. He only told her after she got pregnant. Then he told her he wasn't going to leave his wife. Ms. Lewis then packed her bags and left her town for good. She never saw him again, and he never tried to find her. She decided to devote herself entirely to her daughter. They lived in a small town. Ms. Lewis worked in the canteen, and it helped them not to starve, even in the hardest times. Ms. Lewis had no more serious relationships with men because she no longer believed in the sincerity of men's feelings. As the years passed, Hillary grew up, trained as a hairdresser, and began to work in one of the beauty salons. One day, a very irritated client came to her. He was upset with a haircut he got at one of the salons, and he asked her for at least a little correction of the inexperienced master's mistake. "You see, I came to this town on business matters," the client said angrily. "And how can I show up to investors with a haircut like that?" Smiling, calm, Hillary not only fixed the man's haircut, but also managed to calm him down, to dissipate his unpleasant thoughts. In the evening, he came to her with flowers and invited her on a date. That is how Hillary met Kevin, and soon she became his wife. Before the wedding, Kevin took the girl to his city, and 3 years later, Miss Lewis moved there. But she adamantly refused to live in their house, explained that she did not want to disturb them. Then Kevin helped her buy a cozy apartment downtown, where she now lived. Often, Miss Lewis asked them to bring her grandson to her, and she gladly was taking care of him, adoring the boy more than anything else in the world. When he was born, Miss Lewis was the first to take him in her arms. She was by her daughter's side all the time, and it so happened that when Hillary was in labor, Kevin was on a business trip abroad, and returned when Leo was 3 weeks old. Since then, 8 happy years have flown by. But now Ms. Lewis was distressing her daughter, and her health had taken a strange turn for the worse. Her heart began to ache frequently, and she had to be under constant medical supervision. After visiting his mother-in-law, Kevin drove to the office. But suddenly, as he approached one of the intersections, he braked sharply, causing the righteous anger of other drivers. But he couldn't just drive by, because his son Leo, who was supposed to be at school now for a sports lesson, hurried somewhere along the sidewalk. The boy was carrying some bags, apparently quite heavy. Ignoring the signals from the other cars, Kevin turned into the alley and parked the car in front of a store. Hiding from his son, Kevin followed him and saw that after 2 blocks, the kid had turned to some small private house and confidently stepped through the wicket. He had obviously been here more than once before. It was all very strange. Kevin approached and peered cautiously over the fence. The house was poor but quite clean. The little yard was swept clean, and a cat was sitting on the porch. Kevin pushed the wicket and entered. At first he wanted to knock, but changed his mind and pulled the door open. What Kevin saw inside made him freeze on the spot. There was an old woman in her 70s lying on the bed in the room. She was covered with a blanket, and a tall stool was next to her, with some medicine and a glass of water on it. Leo was fixing a pillow behind the old woman's back, and next to him there was a boy sitting in a wheelchair, a skinny copy of Leo. They had exactly the same face, a mole above his lip, a swirl of unruly hair. The boy was dressed very poorly, but his shirt and shorts were clean. The creak of an old wheelchair broke the silence. "Daddy, what are you doing here?" Leo asked calmly, and in a very adult way. "What are you doing here? Who are these people?" Dad answered in wonder. "This is Alan, and this is his grandmother, Mrs. Wilson. I'm helping them. You see how poor and hard they live, don't you?" "Leo," Kevin exhaled, "I don't understand anything. You look so much alike." "Did you notice that too?" "I noticed, Dad. I met Alan when he was begging. It was near the park. I was walking from school and saw him. Mrs. Wilson was sick and she needed medicine, and that's when I gave them everything I had. I've been coming here ever since, and I help them. Alan is like a brother to me." "Why didn't you say something to me?" How long have you been coming here?" "Since last spring. I was afraid you would forbid me. Once I saw you chase away a beggar who came up to you." "A beggar? I don't remember." "Since the spring? But that's almost a year, isn't it?" Kevin staggered and crouched down in a chair. The man's head was spinning. "I don't understand anything. How is this possible? Alan, where are your parents?" The boy smiled and shrugged. "I've always lived only with my grandmother," the boy replied. Kevin turned to the old lady, and she, silent the whole time, said quietly, "Boys, go outside. I need to talk to Leo's dad." The boys looked at each other, and Leo silently wheeled the wheelchair with Alan out of the room. Kevin turned to the old lady again. "Mrs. Wilson, maybe you can explain to me why Alan looks so much like Leo as if they were brothers. Is that possible? Is Alan your grandson?" "Alan's not my grandson," she muttered. "I took him from the maternity hospital. I worked there as a nurse. He was abandoned by his parents." "No, it can't be," Kevin groaned. "Yes, my wife was expecting twins, but one of them didn't survive. That's what they told me. My wife had a C-section, and the delivery was very difficult." "Who told you that the second boy died?" the old lady asked. "Ms. Lewis, my mother-in-law. I was abroad, and she was with Hillary the whole time." Kevin was suddenly confused and silent. A sudden thought ran through his head. But why? How could she give up on Alan? "Why?" the man muttered. "He was very weak indeed, but he survived. I nursed him back to health. I had just retired at the time and asked them to give him to me. I convinced everyone that he couldn't survive in an orphanage, and I was single. I could raise him. As you can see, he's perfectly healthy," said the old lady. Kevin got down on his knees in front of the old lady and covered her wrinkled hand with kisses. "Why is he in a wheelchair?" the man asked. "A year ago, he and I were at the bus stop when a car crashed into it. A lot of people died, but we were lucky. Alan needs surgery, but it's too expensive. I'm sick too. My leg's not working at all," said the old woman. "I'll help you. I'll surely help you," whispered Kevin. Losing all power in his voice, he sat down on the floor, put his arms around his knees, and suddenly cried out like a baby. The old woman silently stroked his head. An hour later, they arrived at Kevin's house together. Hillary, who came out to meet the guests with a smile as soon as she saw the disabled boy, lost consciousness and fell into the arms of her husband. That same evening, Kevin and Hillary arrived at the hospital to see Ms. Lewis. "Mom," said Hillary, "our second son has been found. His name is Alan. He and the lady who raised him will now live with us. But we want to know, why did you do that? It was you who did that, right?" "Yes, I did that," Ms. Lewis said with a heaviness in her voice. "The doctors said that the second child was unlikely to survive. So when you woke up, I told you that the second baby had died. You were very weak after the delivery. I bribed the doctors and slipped you a document to give up the baby, and you signed it without realizing what you were doing. I wanted to protect you from grief. Forgive me," the woman sobbed. "I went to the maternity hospital afterward, and they told me he was already adopted. I tried to find the baby, but I couldn't. I'm so sorry. I've been torturing myself all these years. I'm so sorry." Hillary and Kevin left the ward in silence. A few days passed. Ms. Lewis was discharged, and with no firm step, she headed toward the exit from the hospital. Suddenly she stopped, pressed her palm to her mouth, and wept. Her daughter, her son-in-law, and both grandchildren had come to meet her, and she realized that they had generously forgiven her. 6 months passed. Hillary, Kevin, Ms. Lewis, Mrs. Wilson, and both boys were seated at the big table in the living room of the house. Alan had recently returned from abroad, where he had undergone surgery and now walked on his feet, leaning only on a cane. Mrs. Wilson felt well, too. She and Ms. Lewis had become friends, and both women had recently arrived from a resort where they had been resting and treated for almost a month. Hillary looked at her family with a cheerful glance and smiled. "I don't know how to tell you, Kevin, but I'm pregnant." Kevin jumped up from his seat and hugged his wife tightly. Everyone else applauded them and smiled. Real happiness had come to the home where love had lived before, and everyone believed it would never leave this house. This big family would become even more friendly and stronger than before. How could it be